Welcome back, everyone. We are live for another episode of Growing with My Fellow Growers. I am your host, Jack Greenstock. You can find me on Cannabis and Instagram. You can also find me at Jack_Greenstock on Twitter. I'm joined, as always, by an amazing panel, and I want to pass it over first to Spartan Grown.
What's up, everybody? I'm Spartan Grown. I'm a cultivator here in Michigan. At my home grow, I focus on organic, and at work at Mint Mechanical, we grow synthetically there. So you can find me at Spartan Grown on Instagram, all one word, or you can shoot me an email, spartangrown@gmail.com.
Welcome back, Spartan. Always great to have you. And next up, Matthew Gates.
Hey everyone, this is Matthew Gates. I'm an integrated pest management specialist, and I do a lot of cool things. But if you watch the Future Cannabis Project, you can find on their second channel a 4-hour podcast I did with Soup the Gardener and G-Bay Genetics, and we talked about various aspects of IPM, and I thought it was a really illuminating sort of discussion. So you can find some of my more recent talk there. You can also find me on my Zenthanol YouTube channel, where a bunch of my free IPM information can be found.
Welcome back, and he's also a staff writer at Skunk Magazine, and soon to be having some more work with Dr. MJ Coco, which, speaking of which, welcome back, Dr. MJ.
Hey guys, yeah, Dr. MJ Coco from CocoForCannabis.com. I'm actually heading off for a road trip tomorrow with my wife. We're going about 5 hours, so I just figured out what 4 hours you're going to be listening to. So I hope my wife is interested in some IPM with Matthew Gates. But yeah, I'm happy to be back with you guys. I was gone visiting my mother last week, but yeah, excited to be here for the show.
Well, we are happy to have you back, as always. I was going to pass it over next to Brandon, but he's taking a bong rip, so we'll go over to the American one.
Hello, Jack panel and everyone in chat. It's great to be here tonight. I'm the American one on YouTube, and the American one _ with 18s, with _18s on IG. And yeah, it's always good to be here. Hope everyone had a great week, and yes, good to be back.
Off to a great start. We've got, I'm having a good week at least. I want to remind everybody who's with us, click on over to the live chat so you can see all the messages and don't get any of them filtered out based on YouTube's algorithm and choices. Next up, Brandon Rust.
What's going on, everybody? Brandon Rust. If you guys aren't familiar with me, you can find me on Instagram at rust.brandon. Here, I'll change my little icon in the section there, right there, bam. IG, you can find a link to Bokashi Earthworks, my fertilizer company, and Black Label Organics, which is my farm in Oklahoma.
Welcome back. Always a pleasure to have you. I know you're a busy man, as are many of us on the panel, but I want to pass it next to Noah the Grower.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? Yeah, sorry I've been off for a couple of weeks, but excited to be here. I'm Noah the Grower with 2 E's, and yeah, I'm ready to get into it. How's everyone doing?
Doing well. Happy to have you back. I want to pass it next to, and last but certainly not least, Kyle Breeder. Welcome back, Kyle.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, my name is Kyle Breeder. I am a cannabis breeder that specifically specializes in feminized seeds. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. I do have a website if you're looking for feminized seeds and autoflower seeds, and within a week or so. It's the website is the letter P followed by breeding.com. And for anybody that is interested, and I haven't done it on all social media platforms because it would just be too much to manage. But if anybody is on Instagram that's listening, I am doing a free clone giveaway for a clone of one of my mothers of my personal breeding stock. So if you're interested in that, please look at my recent feed posts and follow those, basically what's stated on the feed. And yeah, I'm happy to be here, and thanks for hosting, Jack.
Follow those instructions and you may be the winner of that clone. I've won a few things on Instagram myself, including my Curador and some other cool shit. So definitely check out Kyle's giveaway. That's really cool. And also I want to say thank you to Kyle because he's hooking up a family member of mine with some seeds, which was very generous of him. Get him started out with some Fems, photoperiod, something that I know is resistant to a little bit of stress in case they mess up a little bit here and there, but we'll still end up with some fire. Now, Kyle, you mentioned that your Fem autoflower seeds are going to be ready in about a week, and I'm just curious because I know my process. I'm making like F2s and F3s with a strain, and roughly how long it takes me to get the seeds to be ready for germination and ready to send out to my testers and things like that. But I'm just curious, what's your process from when you harvest a seeded plant to the, getting it into a vial and ready for somebody to grow?
Yeah, so just I guess to be more specific, because I don't want people to think that I'm just smashing two plants together and like releasing them. But so I have partnered with, or a collaboration, however you want to see it, with Full Duplex, aka Mandalorian Genetics. So those are going to be available on the website. In the meantime, we are doing a project together. I'm going to have some stuff. I'm going to work. He said I could work with his stuff, and so there's some collaboration in that regards on the background coming. But I should have his gear on my website soon. So shout out to him. But in regards to your specific question, so what I know is important is drying the flower out to basically almost powder. At least this is just my process, and I've had very good feedback from everything. So I dry it out to extreme powder. Sometimes the environments don't allow for that. So if you do have more of a damp room that has a higher humidity and you're having trouble having the flower get to that point, running a fan directly on it will speed that process up. If you do have a humid room, it'll still help, and it'll get to that point. And basically, when I get to that flower, when I have it in my hand and crush it, that it turns into powder, because it dries the seed itself. It dries that out, but it also makes it extremely easier to deal with when you're trying to go through, pounds of flour with seeds in there. So now you have that stock. And then what I highly suggest from that point is either if you want to sit on a couch and try and singly finger out seeds, which is an extremely long and drawn out task. I would just maybe reach out to some carpenter that you might know or somewhere and just throw them a couple $100 to build you a seed sorter. That's what I did. And it's basically, I can do 3 pounds of trim and seed and have basically a finished product of just seed within like 2 minutes max. But so once you get your seeds at that point, you've dried it out completely, you got your seeds now. I've tried not freezing it and seeing how that process went, and the germination rate and the way they grew definitely weren't as good as if you were to put them in the freezer, basically replicating Mother Nature, the frost, the freezing, and then maybe, and then coming back through spring. I've had a way better improvement in regards of freezing it. So what I did is once I dried it out, got the seed, I put it in the freezer probably, I think, for around 3 or 4 days. And then what you want to do is when you pull it out, don't just open the lid and check on it. You want it to actually defrost and thaw back to the room temperature that it's in, and then you can open it up and play with it, and then you can start packing it and stuff like that into vials. And that's literally and specifically the process that I use.
Nice. I tried a few side-by-sides. I did room temperature versus Curador, which was 60 degrees, versus my freezer versus my refrigerator with like 50 seeds each, and germinated like 10 of the ones in each condition. And the freezer, fridge, and Curador all had like 100% germination. The room temp was a little bit lower. So I just went with the easiest one that had the highest result for me, which was 60 degrees, 60% RH, just like I keep my flower. But I definitely think that the winterizing process of the seed potentially could increase the germination rate. I've heard some people actually take stuff that they're having a hard time germinating, throw it in the freezer. When they take it out, let it thaw, then germinate it, have higher success rates with their popping those seeds. So definitely. I'm also interested to see, I know Brandon also has been making seeds that he's put out into the market a little bit recently. Is your process similar to Kyle's, and what's your step, how do you go from harvesting the seeded plant to having your seeds ready to be shipped to someone who wants to grow them?
Yeah, it's same thing. It's a lot of work, pulling seeds out of a plant. I have a little seed counter now, which is nice, but I literally would like take a strainer, like a spaghetti strainer, and as long as you can get your material, like Kyle said, really powdery, you can sift all the material right through that, and then you can be left with just your seeds. If you've done a pretty good job and you got everything to finish and mature, you're usually only left with really nice mature seeds. But in the case that you didn't, you can, like Kyle said, you can use a seed separator. Or one of the things that I even have done is I've taken a long styrofoam box, and then what I did is took a blow dryer and I let them kind of fall down, and I blew dry the heavier seeds that were good would fall, and all the bad ones would kind of keep blowing upwards. So I could kind of separate them that way. I've done all kinds of different things, sifting techniques, all that stuff. I really need a seed separator though.
Yeah, they're pretty badass from all the videos I've seen for the small
Cascade
home.
Road's building them now. That's where I'd be looking.
What's that?
Cascadian Grown on his website. He's selling them. It's a different version. It's lower. It's not this big tall thing, but I like it.
Yeah, I mean, whatever works, really. I found out a pretty poor man's method the other day because I made the Velvet Punch F3s, and as I've been breaking up the buds, I do kind of like Kyle was talking about, dry it even further than I would like my bud that I'm going to smoke. So with the herbs now, I do like a double cycle. So I intentionally get it super dry so that way I can break it up really easily and all the seeds break out. And I put it into a rolling tray. Like I'm going to go, bust it down and smoke it up. But when I'm separating the seeds, I kind of use a card and brush most of them off to the side, and you get left with about 50% seeds and 50% plant material. I'll take that and I'll scoop it out with like a piece of, cardboard, whatever, credit card. And I just, for whatever reason, I was trying to like blow, like Brandon was talking about with, I saw a bunch of people using different methods to use wind to get it to separate the plant material. But I had some paper towel sitting next to me. So I took 2 long sheets of paper towel and folded it like hot dog style. And I dropped the seeds on there and I rolled it from one to the next. And the plant material got stuck to the paper towel because it was sticky, where the seeds were a little more dry and they would just kind of roll through. So what took me a half an hour to pull 100 seeds, like Kyle was saying, by finger with like I had tweezers and I was just picking it out of the broken up plant material, to like less than 30 seconds sorting over 100 seeds. It was definitely cool to advance the technique with such a simple process. But the American one, I know you're also a seed maker yourself, so I'm curious if you have any secret techniques, or what's your method to go from the harvested plant to sending the seed out to people?
Yeah, I never put them in the freezer. I put them in the refrigerator for like 2 weeks. So basically, like similar to what Kyle was saying, and I try and let it go as long as I can to let them ripen as much as possible. Then I just hang it up, let it dry as much as possible. And then after they're separated from the plant material, I'll put them all in the refrigerator for 2 weeks. And I'll take them out, and I won't mess with them. I'll let them get to regular temperature, and then I'll put them. I don't know if I'm going to continue doing this, but I was putting them in a mason jar with. I would take rice, put it in the oven, and heat it up to about 200 degrees, and let it dry out thoroughly, so that the rice is totally dry and nothing's on it. I probably put it up to like 300, whatever.
Sterilizing.
And yeah, so. And drying it out totally. You want it totally dry. But I don't know if that's the best the route anymore. But I'll probably continue because it seems to work. And all the seeds that I've been sending out that are 3 years old, I guess 4. I might have some that are left over. I think I have a little jar, but I'm not putting those, like sending those out anymore. But yeah, definitely 3-year-old seeds are definitely all damn near 100% germination still. So
I had 100% germination with your Amy Aces. I don't know when you made that batch, but 100%.
Yeah. Okay.
I was pretty stoked. I've got 2 females right now that I'm trying to pick between. I've them growing next to the Donny Burger, and it was originally the plan was to do 1 Amy Aces and 1 Donny Burger, but both Amy Aces are so much like healthier and happier and like great looking plants, and the Donny Burger is kind of like a thinner, more fickle plant and veg.
Right.
But I'm just like forcing myself to take at least 1 Donny Burger and pull the 1 Amy Aces off.
Knocking on wood that she doesn't disappoint, because GMO from the 420 Grow Forum. Oh shit, yeah, them guys. GMO has a whole room full of them, so and it's looking good. I just saw it on his IG, so knock on wood. I hope you all are not disappointed. I love that plant. The mother is really unique. So
I'm growing some GMO right now, and I'm gonna take a bunch of cuts and cross it with all the select males that I do out of this pheno hunt. I'm going to find 3 males from the varieties that I'm looking at, and I'm going to flower all of my males out to find the best one. And then the first crosses are going to be with the Afghani Bull Rider and the GMO. So those 2 clones are going to be hit by like, I'll do an Afghani do an Afghani Bull Rider times whatever males that I have. I'll take, I'll just have I have a little chamber inside of a little chamber inside of a room in the back of my shipping container, so I can do like hunts for males and stuff. It's gonna be pretty cool.
I'm stoked on that for you. The funny thing was the GMO that Tao was talking about is actually the guy. We call him GMO. He's from over. I won't say which country, but he's in one of those European countries with an accent where they're not allowed to grow just yet, and their YouTube is Grow Room 420 community videos. So shout out to GMO. They might even be in the chat with us right now. Kyle, it looked like you unmuted. I don't know if you wanted to jump in there.
Oh no, I was just thinking. I'm just ironically, I don't know if you guys seen it, but shout out to Skunk Tech and Mean Gene. I have a GMO by a root beer back cross clone that got sent to me, so I'm like extremely happy to see where that goes, and to be having like some little work from the two of those guys because they're both really good.
I respect them both a lot. The one thing I wanted to say is I've heard a lot of root beer, but it's all like sort of been like hype and
Hype, yeah,
honestly
right.
a lot of memes. And I know it's Mean Gene is known for his memes, but he's also known for really dank cannabis as well. So I'm curious if anybody knows the story behind the root beer. Does it actually smell and taste like root beer? Like, what's the deal with the root beer?
Well, what's funny is if you look at my post, some guy was like, yeah, it's all hype shit. And then Mean Gene actually came on to my commentary from that post and like basically like, because some guy was like, oh, basically the guy was like, aficionado sells the root beer seeds and they're too high priced. How would this kid even have the real cut? Because he was talking about the picture that I posted. And all of a sudden Skunk Tech came in. He's like, dude, it is the real deal. Mean Gene gave me the root beer cut and I crossed it into the GMO that I have. And then Mean Gene himself came on. He was like, first of all, dude, he's like, aficionado doesn't even sell root beer seeds. Nobody has root beer seeds. I've never released root beer seeds. There is no root beer seeds. And that cut is my cut. And that is real root beer. So that was like all went down on my post.
So it's cool that you definitely have the real lineage, but does anybody like know, is it a good high? Does it smell like root beer, taste like root beer? Like what's the significance?
Sure.
I only know, I think, maybe one or two people that are growing it, and I have never even asked them.
You know what? I think next week we should try and ask Mean Gene to have a cameo appearance and explain it personally, right?
Reach out to him. Shit, Brandon and Kyle both have connections. Knock knock. What's
Let's
up,
try
guys?
and do that. Yeah.
Let's do a lime root beer.
Dude, I have some insane stuff. So I haven't released any of the Death Breath times Lime 1, and I'm not going to. The shit is fucking insane, dude. The terpene profile on it is crazy. So I'm gonna hunt through everything that I have. But he gave me I have like 55 black lime reserves that from seed that I got from them. That's one of the things I'm gonna hit onto the GMO. Dude, I have a huge list of projects going forward.
We have a question real quick if before we jump into that, if we could just hit this, because I think it's a short answer for most of us, but Kyle answered it in the chat. Spartan Grown was kind enough to send it to us. Good Life asks, how long would you put them, being the seeds, in the freezer for? My answer would be, Kyle said 4 days only is necessary. So as short as 4 days to indefinitely. I've heard people keeping them 10, 20, 30 years in the freezer. I saw Kagyu of Coastal Seeds popped a 35 or 40-year-old seed that he had been keeping in his freezer. So it slows down the aging process, just like everything else. There's going to be less microbes on it. It's not going to age as quickly. So that's how they Svalbard. That's how they preserve their seeds. It's extremely cold. So it's
if you can afford a cryo freezer, you can definitely go forever.
They have to be stored properly too. It's not like they're just taking a seed and you throw it in a bag and then throw it in the freezer.
like a Ziploc bag.
Exactly. Yeah. So one tip on the freezer is like using multiple layers of jars. So like if you had it in a bag, then you could put like rice in a mason jar and throw it in. So if you don't want the rice to directly hit, that'll be a simple way to prevent some of the moisture. But there's a whole bunch of ways. The cheapest and easiest way I found for keeping moisture out of the seed and not having to worry about disinfecting anything is a clean paper towel. It absorbs moisture and it's not going to mess with your seeds at all. And you can just rip off tiny little pieces of it. I've used that to take stuff in and out of fridges and freezers and never had any issues with them like starting to germ because a little bit of moisture got in there.
I heard a real brilliant one. This guy
Can
was.
I jump
this guy
in
was-
one thing about freezing the seeds?
Yeah.
First of all, I think it would probably be fine to just refrigerate them. I definitely see the advantage there of sending the seed into dormancy. Freezing them is not going to be a problem if the seed is dry enough. The problem would be if you tried to freeze seeds that were still too wet, and that could cause damage inside the seed.
Right.
That's a great point. Because if it's not dry enough, it'll, as people may or may not know, water expands when it gets frozen. That happened
Yeah.
with the Cleveland Browns stadium. They made their windows a little bit too tight with their frame, and like when the water got in there and it froze, it expanded and it made all the windows shatter for like a giant section of this stadium.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
definitely not a good thing if your water inside the seed freezes and then busts the shell open.
And that's actually the other side of the concern with being in a freezer is the super low humidity. That the seed would survive the temperatures, but eventually it could become dehydrated.
Yeah, I would say you want to freeze it for long-term storage, but when you think about it, most of the plants, well, actually, I take it back. I don't know. But many of the plants never that are in the wild, their seeds just drop and they don't ever freeze in the tropics and places near the equator. Other places, though, they definitely would freeze. So, yeah, I like the refrigeration cooling, freak them into thinking it's winter time or whatever it does and resetting them. So that's my 2 cents. I don't like freezing them at all.
I do that too as part of my germination sort of ritual. I take them out. I just keep them in the refrigerator, but I take them out and let them warm up for a couple of days before sort of dropping the seeds to sort of initiate that break from dormancy.
I do the same thing. When I store my seed vault or whatever, it's just a mini fridge. That's where I store all my seeds. And I'll take them out a couple of days before I decide to plant them.
That's a big tip for anybody who's just keeping them at room temp, especially if you're like myself in a warmer climate in Southern California. I don't run air conditioning. If I had some seeds from when I first, got back into growing, 4 or 5 years back, and I went to start germinating a lot of those, and a lot of them had way lower germ rates. So keeping it in that fridge, if you're not going to use it like this year or within the next 24 months, I think is definitely a good practice because they'll definitely start to have worse germination than if like when you got it fresh from that seed bank. Hopefully, if they're not super old already, then you've got a much better chance of getting them to pop.
Yeah, I've had all my gear in mason jars since 2019, and those things are still basically what I still been throwing out, and I haven't had any issues yet. So I would definitely suggest, any type of really good sealed type jars if you do plan on storing as well. And another tip I heard that this guy was putting his seeds inside of a thermos and then into the freezer, so that way if something does happen or you lose power, there's extra protection in that area. So I thought that was a pretty good idea.
Yeah, that's smart because then it's double insulated and you don't have to worry about like the lining of the.
That is smart. Yeah.
Yeah. Now they got those 24-hour freezer thermos. I'm sure that would help a little bit.
Absolutely, and the cost of that stuff's come down, and there's a lot of like imitation brands that knock off like the big brands, and so you can get one pretty affordably that'll effectively store your seeds probably for the rest of your life in a safe fashion. So shout out to you, Kyle. That was a great tip from whoever you learned it from. Glad we could pass on that knowledge to the audience because I know a lot of people are seed poppers. Some people do start from clones, but I think a lot of us are popping seeds. And I wanted to pass it over to Spartan. You've been a little bit quiet, and I saw you token earlier. I want to ask what you're smoking on, and what's the most recent seed that you've popped?
Okay, I have no idea what I was token on because it was a nug that somebody gave me, and they told me, and I completely forgot what it was. But I was testing out this new product I got from my buddy Abolished, and let me see, it's from Valhalla Laboratories, and it's a little paintbrush, but it's filled with distillate. And you turn the top and it like corkscrews down a little bit onto the brush. And I just, instead of licking my joint clean, I just used this. And it stuck the joint together and added a little distillate. It was kind of cool.
Hey, that is really innovative, man.
Yeah, I've seen
I
like
like
other,
that.
I saw other
that's
stuff,
pretty
but
dope.
never infused. That's a great idea.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And what was your, the last thing I popped was some Autoflowers. I'm planning to do, well, I already planted 2 indoor to replace the 2 that came down. And those were an auto power grape from Morningstar. And that's a regular. So it could be male or it could be female. And then right next to it, I planted a feminized autoflower from 2020 Mendocino called Sparkle Face, which is a snow cane cross. And I did this on purpose because if it so happens to be a male, I'll just cross the two and get a bunch of autoflower seeds and never run out of autoflowers. And then I did the same thing. I just popped those. The last ones I popped were the same 2 strains, just like what I said, and those are going to go outside this year. And every month I'm planning on putting 2 more autoflowers outside. And then I'll harvest every month starting in probably end of July, maybe August.
I'm excited for you to throw this into action because I know the past few years you've been talking about how you've been planning to implement autos outdoors, and it's cool to see because I know you've been growing photo periods outdoors in Michigan for a number of years now. So that's kind of a cool approach to take, is just throwing them out segmented, and you can see sort of which ones finish at which time of year and all that good stuff.
It's more a test for me. Is like I want to see. I think because autoflowers are more new and not well known, nobody's going to expect them to be done early for as far as security wise goes. So I'm only doing a couple at a time, and I'm only doing autoflowers because I'm doing it in my own yard, which is in a neighborhood. So if somebody's going to rip them, I don't really care that much, and I'll know not to try to do a photo period. But if nobody rips them and I can harvest a bunch of autos out there, I might just do a hoop house next year and put a big, do 1 photo period and test it out and see if I can get away with 1. And if I can get away with 1, move up from there.
One clever Michigander, I heard a story on one of the shows. They were growing hops. They had like a patio where like the top deck is like it overhangs where the below deck is. So they had hops that would kind of go down and over that balcony. And on the balcony below, there was enough light that would come through. They grew cannabis behind the hops. And that was the way that they hit it, kind of secluded. But I would imagine it wouldn't get as big or as large of a yield as if you got more direct sunlight. But it was a way that they pulled it off before things were more legal and to avoid somebody coming in and taking your crop. But it's always a bummer when you have to accommodate for rippers. But I think autoflowers are definitely a good way to get around
I want
it.
to keep the smell down too. So I figured if I had smaller plants like autoflowers, like the first 2, they're getting close to getting ready to be transplanted into their final pot. And I'm going to just put them in pots on the back porch. The next 2 are going to go right in a bed or in the ground somewhere. So I don't want to put too many close to the borders of my property because I don't want to stink out my neighbors. I'm trying not to be an asshole.
I'm about to do our first autoflower project at the farm. Full Duplex sent us 3,200 feminized seeds.
Nice.
So it's going to get pretty wild there.
Hey, have any of you guys ever grown hops?
I haven't.
I haven't, but I know somebody who does.
Is it difficult, Spartan? Is it easy?
Well, it depends on how you're going to grow them because, the guy I know is a farmer, so he's doing it like a farmer would, like no fucking around. He took he had some telephone poles sunk in the ground, and then he strung a cable across between the 2, and then these hop vines in 1 year grew like all the way to the top.
All the way to the top, yeah.
All the way to the fucking top, dude. It's amazing.
So you know what I just thought about earlier? That's like the closest thing to cannabis. I want to grow some hops and then feed it to my worms and then feed that shit to my cannabis plants. It's got to be pretty damn close to what it would want.
You want to grow the thing that is most related, so maybe most likely to have pests that would be able to hop
That's true
over.
Too.
That's my only caveat. That's my only
Yeah.
caveat about that.
But the nutritional
But if you're
balance
treating for
within
one, you're
that-
treating for the other.
But I would also say that the nutritional balance within that plant might be in the correct balance for the cannabis if it's that close, maybe, or maybe it'd be closer than say, I don't know.
There's a book we could find out.
Yeah, shout out to 710 Canuck. He did a post on IG where he now I forget what the wording is.
For
but
the
basically-
biodynamic accumulators.
Yes, isn't that a brilliant post? I'm gonna copy that stuff and find out where you got it and put it in my folder because that's exactly kind of what we're talking about. Because if you want more iron or something, like you could just go to that list and find out what plants you should collect up and turn into food for your plants. Yeah,
it's like a copy of a handwritten list up here. But it's like, yeah, you have to know it goes by element, so like it doesn't go by plant. It's not the reverse.
Yep.
The old
And
natural
plus-
farming handbook there,
Plus, I don't know what like it says one thing, right? So you're looking at an element, say for example potassium, and it gives you a list of things, but what else comes with it? You know, depending on the plant, you're going to get other things with potassium. It's not just potassium.
It's not like going to rawnutrients.com and getting a bag of straight potassium. You know, you're getting like with like kelp, for example, has a ton of shit in there. So,
well, like for example, spearmint. I just made a spearmint tea today because my spearmint grows like fucking crazy. So I just fucking cut it up and pour boiling water over it, let it sit there for about 45 minutes, and then strain it off. But I did spearmint, a little bit of lemon balm, and some stevia today, and I'll probably drop a video on how to make that. That's a good idea.
Lemon balm is like my favorite herb. I used to grow it a lot, and I would, this is sort of a, funny thing, but when I was younger, I felt like I was getting more vivid dreams when I drank like a tisane of lemon balm pretty often, like every day, just about. But, I don't know how true that's going to be for anyone else, or if that was even, having the effect that I ascribed to it. But I do love me some lemon balm for sure.
Good, man. And I got lemon chives too. I like the lemon stuff a lot.
Me too. Lemongrass.
I don't know. It put me in such a good mood today because today was planting day for all my vegetables. I got all my vegetables started. So I just get them from the local greenhouse. I don't need to screw around with planting the seeds anymore. But anyhow,
those things will run. Those things will like reseed, and they'll like make stolons and.
Well, I'm a cheater. See, I just wait for them to say when the last frost is going to be, and then I don't have to fuck around with moving them in and taking them out. Taking them out. I let them do that at the greenhouse. And then when they say, "Oh, you can plant now," then I go down to the greenhouse and get my plants.
I like that. Oh, I also wanted to mention that one cool thing for those who love the the volatiles and the aromatic compounds. I'll tell you what, there's a lot of dank hops out there. The cones will be very they'll have a very pungent aroma and smell, which is why people like to hop wash and make beer and all that kind of stuff.
I can't speak for anywhere else, but in Michigan, the Chinook variety grows very well. That was one of the ones that grew super fast in that first year.
I know a lot of Citra hop is grown in this area. They call the San Diego has a freeway called the 78 I used to live on when I was in college. They call it the Hop Highway, where Stone Brewing Company was based out of. But in that area, there's just tons of breweries. And I was into the craft brews for a little while. If you drink enough IPAs, you can actually start to, just like strains of cannabis, you can be like, wow, I like the Citra hop more than the whatever hop. There's a whole bunch of different strains, and you can begin to identify flavors and honestly almost effects. Like certain ones are more sedating. Some of them will have more myrcene. And it comes across a lot in the beer. Like the summer beers typically have that Citra. It's more citrusy. I'm trying to think of, I haven't drank beer in years at this point, but there's a bunch of different hops, and they all, like I said, have crazy variety of flavor. Some are more bitter, but yeah, I don't know. It's definitely close to cannabis. And like we were talking about earlier, you said, Matthew, that it might be the most likely to attract pests that are going to be on cannabis as well. But my thought would be, you're growing the cannabis anyway, and you're going to be hopefully implementing good IPM for cannabis, which would hopefully have a lot of crossover for the hops. So if you're implementing good IPM for one, hopefully it should cross over to the other.
I agree with that. Spartan made a great point about how you grow hops, though, like with the vines and having the right infrastructure. For other viney plants, I think that's super important so that they don't get all bushy, or rather not just this massive mass, like a passion fruit can be like that too sometimes. And although I will agree, there's a lot of cool phytochemicals in hops and cannabis, of course. So I'm a big advocate for those really great smells, and maybe it'll be like a nice barrier, who knows? But we do have that hop latent viroid running around. So
that's already in cannabis,
Yeah, that's already in cannabis.
We've got plenty of it.
Careful. Who knows though? Who knows what the what the transference rate would be? That'd be a cool thing to find out, if it's or if some hop plants are more resistant or not. I don't really know the data for that.
Have you guys ever tried cannabis infused alcohol?
Oh yeah, I've had a bunch of that. We got a bunch of free samples. My wife and she met some influencer girl who got sponsored by a few of these different companies, and we've had infused wine, beer, all of the different.
How did that work, Jack?
Isn't that what you'd call with anything else, just a tincture?
Pretty much, but it's like a hoppy, you know, it's flavored like a beer would taste, or it's flavored like a wine would taste, but you're just getting the effects. And what I would consider an edible timeline for me is 90 minutes to 2 hours, so an hour and a half to 2 hours. With a drink, it's usually like 45 minutes to an hour. For some people, they report feeling it in 20 minutes, but I think there's a lot of placebo effect and like literally sugar. You're getting a sugar rush when you're drinking some of this shit. So like, oh, I'm feeling uppity, like I'm feeling it already. It's like you're feeling like the sugar in that fucking drink, you know? So there's a lot that goes into the effect of that. But I would say some of them I really like. There's like 1-to-1s and 2-to-1s and pure THC and pure CBD and CBD water, hemp water, all this stuff. It just, you have to find the one that's right for you, I guess, like anything. Some of them I've had and they tasted disgusting. Some of them I had, you could taste the cannabis and some you can't. So it's just really like any industry, I guess, it evolves to the point where there's enough variety of flavor and potencies that you'll hopefully be able to find something for you if that's your cup of tea, or in this case, infused cannabis beverage.
Actually, on the point of seeds, you asked people who were popping seeds. I had some friends come over from I've mentioned them several times on the show at this point. They're growing up in the high desert, and they came down for some more seeds to grow. And I handed them this packet that I got from my friends over at Saigo International, which apparently is some Hardigear, HARTIGEAR on Instagram.
Shout out to Alex Hardy.
All right. Well, there you go. I see. I knew Jack would have the down low. This is the hardcore, which was THC, right? Trainwreck and New Mexico Land Grant, it says. 22 to 30 regular seed, open pollinated for dry farm or traditional horticulture, it says on the pack. I only have a picture of it here with me, but I let them go with it, and they were able to get some other seeds too, and we'll see how that goes.
If you want to learn more about that New Mexico land grant, he does a really good job breaking it down on Fucking Talking Shit with Eagle, Alex Hardy of Hardy Gear, his second appearance. So if you Google or type that into YouTube, the more recent one, it was a few weeks back, but I haven't burned it into my memory banks quite yet. That's why I'm the Wikipedia of cannabis and not the fucking Google of cannabis, because I don't know all of it, and it takes me a little while.
People can edit it though, so.
Yeah, right. But yeah, he's a really interesting character. He's been breeding, or he doesn't even consider himself a breeder, I think he says, but he's been making seeds for like 30 plus years, and he's got a really interesting perspective, and big shout out to him. And I'm happy you could get those seeds to your friends, and I remember lots of stories with them, so I'm glad they're sort of a reoccurring character. Sometime maybe they'll have to come on the show.
That would be really awesome.
I got some random news.
More than welcome. Go ahead, Kyle.
So when obviously, I don't know how many people know this or who's been following that long, but so my day job is I'm an electrician, and we're doing a big job right now in a town in Massachusetts, and the general contractor who basically supervises all the trades was this older gentleman. He's like in his late 60s, I want to say, and still moving around like an animal, which I found interesting. But I was talking to him one day. I was doing some outside work, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm from I was in the Vietnam War and this and that," and he heard me talking about weed, and he's like, "What do you know about weed?" And we're just going back and forth. He's like, "Yeah, well, I got some." He's like, "When I came back from, I forget exactly where, but basically he had told me that he had brought some legitimate Panama red seeds back that he smuggled from being over there, and he's had them in his freezer since then." And I was like, "Oh man," I was like, "Well, what are you gonna do with them?" He's like, "Well, I'm retiring in about a couple months from now, and I'm gonna pop them." And I was like, "Man, you might want to be careful, because if that's literally all you have, there might be a chance that they might not germinate, because the amount of food stored in that seed might not be enough for to take off." And I was like, "I have connections with somebody that does embryo rescuing," and basically, and this was just a couple of weeks ago, so he's coming back. He was on vacation in a couple of days, so I'm gonna have some literal era dated Panama red seeds in my hands within the next couple of days or so. So I'm wicked excited about playing with those and seeing what that's even like. So it's pretty interesting.
It is awesome, man. I'm super excited. These next ones, I'm going to pop for these right here. It's probably going to be within the next couple of weeks.
Is it a Brandon Russ creation?
Yeah, this is the Mac Cross. What is it, the 7 or an L? I'm not really sure what that is.
No, it's an L.
Okay, L.
That's the Limelight.
Okay, Limelight.
Yeah, it's the Lamarilla F2 breeder cut times Mac V2. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I can't wait, man. You know how I love the Mac, and then you with the Limerilla, fuck yeah.
Dude, it's really nice. It's fast finishing. It chunks up really nice. The Trainwreck Blueberry MK Ultra times McAfee 2 that I did. Woo-wee, that one's got a fucking awesome, amazing terpene profile on it. I'm really excited about that. I'll be dropping that pretty soon.
On this line, back to this one that I got, what's the high like on that? Is it like a more uplifting, or is it more like sedative? Okay.
Yeah. So for me, the stuff that I've always leaned towards is varieties that are more mentally stimulating. That's what I like.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot like that, so that'd be perfect. I need that, especially if it's fast finishing, because you usually got to go long to get that.
Oh no, man. It's really, I think it has to do with the terpene profiles. They're very bright. It's the
like citrus.
and pine, and it has some like the basil. So that the ones that I grew out that I tested out, I had most of them were a pretty consistent as far as what was coming out, and it was really much like lemon basil, with probably some like just like a kind of like that musty kind of citrus in there too. It's nice though. You'll like it.
Especially if it veg is fine. It doesn't veg like Mac.
Oh, dude, they go real fast.
Did you keep any of those Velvet Punch cuts? I remember you were mentioning you liked the more sativa high, and I wasn't sure what the flowering time on that was like for you.
I got the Velvet Punch the Velvet Punch F2 Pheno 1 is going in flower right now, but I don't remember if I have a cut behind it or not. But I definitely have another run of it. It's going right now. So that'll be I'm thinking, yeah, that's the next harvest that's coming down will be that.
Because I remember when you said, you're like, this is one of my only ones that's uplifting, and I was like, oh, that's interesting, because everybody's stable's a little bit different. Some people carry heavier on the more sedating or indica leaning side. Some people like a lot of sativas in their stable, and some people have a mix. So I had an interesting flavor that I think they missed out. The name is cool, don't get me wrong. Shout out to I think it's Compound Genetics. Yeah, it is Compound Genetics. Flavor Crystals is the name of the strain that I had today, and it's a pretty unique, interesting flavor. But the cross is grape pie with crossed to Legend Orange Apricot F2. And I thought because it has an apricot and a grape, you could have called it like Grapericot or something silly. I don't know. But Flavor Crystals is good. It kind of reminded me of like a Jack Herrera, though, which didn't make sense looking at the lineage, with like an orange undertone. The orange is definitely apricot-y, like orange. Like it's kind of sour, like a sour Jack Herrera with like an orangey apricot mix in there. But definitely different than anything that I've had in quite some time.
Sounds good.
I was hanging out. We had a little sesh with the bros, and Tara, shout out to Tara Wilson in Tree 420. They brought me a sample of their cheesequake, and it was grapey, man. It wasn't cheesy at all, and it was grapey. I fucking loved it. It was gassy and grapey. It's like, oh, that is some good shit. I left with some of that. I need to get some more of this.
That's isn't cheesequake maybe is Quirkle in that?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Quirkle costs UK cheese.
Yep.
Yeah, so that purple Urkel shines through sometimes. It's like the Velvet Punch. You've got that Larry OG purple punch. It was Larry OG to Granddaddy Purple. And that Granddaddy Purple, even like generations later, you can get those really artificial candied grape terps and esters coming through, that methylanthranolate.
That's the pheno I kept with the Velvet Punch, was the grapey one. The that number one, it was a lot smaller, and it was, I would call it the cookie pheno because it was small little nugs, but they were super frosty and they were grape. So I kept that one. It was just so tasty.
Yeah, there's definitely some cookie lineage and morphology in some of the phenos, especially at F2. I personally like those, like the stretch with like a bunch of golf ball nugs all the way down the branches. They can yield pretty decent. It doesn't look like they're yielding really well until you got it all jarred and weighed up, and you're like, damn, those are a lot more dense. Like I've had it to where 2 ounces fit in one jar versus like 1 ounce of a different strain fitting in the jar and things like that. But it's definitely not a huge yielder when you get some of those phenos, but there's some more OG leaning phenos that have like the more kind of triangle shaped buds, and it's a little bit more like foxtailed and open, but they'll be a little bit heavier.
What have you been seeing with the F3s?
I haven't actually grown them out, so I just made the F3, so they just got dried. I just harvested the second plant that was pollinated. The first
What were
plants.
the parents? Tell me about the parents, the mother and the father.
So both the mothers turned purple later than my F1. So that was actually kind of opposite to what I was hoping for, because you can't really tell if it's going to turn purple until flowering, you know? So like my F1s, they were purple by day 20, 21. The F2s didn't turn purple until week 7 or 8. So it was like day 49. And that was picking. I grew them both in the wintertime, very similar climate conditions, RH, same lights, everything. So I was a little bit surprised by that. So I'm curious to see. While they were alive, the F2s that I selected, the mothers were really skunky. Like my wife said she thought a skunk sprayed. And I was like, no, that's actually just a tent. Like I could clearly smell it during weeks 5 through 8, a lot of skunkiness. And unfortunately, it didn't carry on into the dried and cured flower. It became more grapey and gassy with some floral, really like interesting floral notes. But yeah, I like them. They're probably a 2.5 to 3 times stretch, maybe 3.5 if you get a specific pheno. But the 2 that I had were at least double to triple stretch.
Are you releasing any of those, Jack?
Unfortunately, no, because there was of the 70 packs I sent out, 3 of the growers found hermaphrodite at F2. So because of that, I don't want to continue on breeding something that has potential hermy issues, despite it being, in my opinion, pretty fire. I just want to, if I was going to get into breeding something that I would release, I'd like to have no herm issues at all. So this is more of a just for fun and, sending them.
Stabilize it with 3 and 4 and then release seeds at that point.
Yeah, the thing was the F2 that I used, one of the females, because I pushed the female a lot later to get the more ripe seeds, I would normally take Velvet Punch at 9 weeks. I took this at like 11, so an extra 2 weeks for seed ripening.
Good.
I saw the late flower nanners on one of the 2 phenos, so that showed me that at least there's some hermy genetics in it as well. And most stuff will do that if you push it long, but there's just too many indicators. The other people found them in like weeks 3 to 5. So it was in the earlier stages of flower. So a very true hermy. The one was light leaks. Another guy had just a 1 gallon pot of organics, but the other case was, I think, truly just genetic.
You know, with that's good that you can find a clone, a clone only that's solid, Jack. That's what if you really like something, I encourage everyone, no matter what's happening, try and find one that you could just keep. Yeah.
Well, my thought is I love it so much. I just wanted to see how it changed from F1 to F2 to F3. And now I know that I'm not going to take it past F3, but I want to look through the F3s and see if I like the F3s or the F2s more, and then look through that for maybe a cut that I'd want to actually work with. The other thing was at F2, 1 in 15, I found a really zigzag sawtooth pheno that you actually were, the American one was one of my testers. He got one of those.
I still have a cut of that. Yeah.
Smokestacks, Michigan. He didn't keep his cut, but probably the most fire of any, no offense to Spartan, but like any of the testers that I sent out, this dude's zigzag, and maybe it was just his pheno, the zigzag pheno, it turned so purple and it was really dense. And like when he.
Is it everyone?
I did the best part.
I know, right?
I was on the edge of my seat over here.
I gotta go, guys.
Waited up in one of the videos. He drops a nug on the table. Peace out, Brandon. Sorry, I'm cutting out.
Peace out, Brandon.
Can you guys hear me yet? It says my connection's unstable.
Yeah.
What's up, Brandon?
Back temporarily.
Yeah, we only heard up until where the plant was wicked purple.
Yeah.
Wicked
Oh, yeah.
purple,
So,
and he said.
So yeah, I was talking about smokestacks. Michigan, he got the sawtooth pheno, and it was a super purple, and he dropped one of the nugs, and it hit the table, and it like fucking sounded like a rock. It was super fucking dense and real frosty. But I'd say probably the most impressive of the testers that have posted their flower results, and not to put Spartan Grown down because his looked really fire too. He had 3 phenos that he flowered out, and I saw 2 of them, and they looked great.
The shit that I
Doesn't bother me at all. But I
posted,
still got a bunch of
Jack.
seeds because remember you sent me one and it never came, and then you sent me a replacement, and then I got the replacement, but then the original finally showed up like 2 weeks later. So I have a bunch. I'm still phenoing, and I can still go through more.
Hey, that's good to hear, man. And I've got plenty more where that came from. So if you, any of the testers who got them want to grow some more, I'd be happy to send them. But I do send out the caveat that they do have the issues of if there is light leaks, their tendency to herm. I'd say a smaller pot can also make it a tendency to herm, but it also might just be in the genetics because I'm not. The American one had one of the phenos, but he also had like 3 or 4 phenos
Yeah,
that
I
didn't
think if you just
herm.
clear up, yeah, if you just, I didn't clean up the lower growth. Well, it was on the lower growth of that one, and yeah, I'm sorry, I chopped it out, but
No, it's fine.
the
That's
other
honestly a
three,
very
dude,
common with the Thin Mint Girl Scout cookie cut. That's
yeah,
actually known. If you don't
it's a
clean up the
thing,
lowers, that happens, and
exactly.
it's a
So
cross of that plant.
but the other three were really killer. Everybody loved them and I had an opportunity to taste them. And then that one zigzag sort thing hasn't, I haven't harvested it yet. And I have 2 cuts of that at least. And yeah, now that you say that, I'm gonna make sure it's good. You know what I'm saying? And I'm gonna keep that one going for sure.
Yeah, the F3 generation should be pretty crazy, Jack, because I know every time I've jumped into the F3s of like, like released hybrids, like it gets crazy and there's so many different variations that you can just completely go different directions with it.
So I think that might be because I've heard a theory that our what we call F1 is actually not the true F1.
Oh,
The F1 doesn't
100%.
happen until you do the cross of 2 different parents, you get those
Right.
siblings, and then you do an actual true F1. So what I'm calling my Velvet Punch F1 is probably like the initial cross. I actually made the F1 by filial generation selecting. I had a brother and a sister cross to each other, which is more like the true F1. So what you're saying is like what I'm calling F3 is really the F2, and that's where there's going to be tons of variation, which is what a lot of people say. Like you see all the grandparents, not just the mom and dad. You see all the grandparents start popping up. So I'm curious about that because
Well, it
I was wondering.
depends. In certain kinds of plant breeding, you always start with homozygotic parent plants, and then you get F1 that's purely heterozygotic. And then things go crazy after that if you try to get to F2, F3, and you just never do. You always breed new F1 seeds. But it entirely depends on what you're starting with in terms of sort of the genetic makeup of the parents. But usually, I'm familiar with that in plant breeding. Usually we're referring to a hybrid with an F1. So it has 2 different parents. They're usually unrelated parents.
Very true.
That's my understanding. Yeah.
So I wanted to just read out the Velvet Punch genetics because it's a crazy polyhybrid. I didn't make it originally. Shout out to my buddy Doja DNA, Doja DNA on Instagram. He sent me the seeds for free. I grew them. I loved them as well as his Spiked Punch, which was another Purple Punch cross. But here's the Velvet Punch. It is Purple Punch is the mom, which is Larry OG crossed to Granddaddy Purple, which he crossed to his Cookie 7, which is Thin Mint Girl Scout Cookie crossed to Black Velvet Kush, which is Chem 4 crossed to Mexican Sativa. And then he crossed that with OG Kush. So all of that mixed into one thing. So it's like tons of propensity to herm. You've got Chem in there, you've got Cookies in there, you got OG in there. All those lineages, for anybody who doesn't know, come from bag seeds, every single one of them. So I think that there's definitely a possibility. And like I said, the Thin Mint Girl Scout cookie specifically, I know guys who run that. If you don't clean up the bottoms before week 2 or 3, and there's like any stuff on the lower that's not getting good light and airflow, there's almost always going to be hermes. So those are the big caveats with that. But like I said, I wouldn't want to release anything that I have to make all these caveats and excuses for because I don't want to unintentionally herm out somebody's garden. That's why I said to everybody, these are testers, they're untested. This is your part of the testing generation. If you find something, just let me know. And I'll let the people that have them know so they can choose to not grow them. They could eat them, feed them to a bird, like Lucky, or flush them down the toilet if they want, or give them to somebody who might want them.
Jack, I'd be interested in some of the stuff that you just crossed if you were willing to send some my way.
Yeah, man. I've got more than I know what to do with, and I'll be happy to send them over to you.
Yeah, definitely.
The one thing I would say is if you ever do use it in the work, just give credit to Doja DNA because that guy is like not well enough known in my opinion. Of all the stuff that I've had the pleasure of growing, his is at the top of my list as far as like quality of breeding. Just vigor from seed. I don't know if it's because like he grows in a greenhouse, gets lots of really good sun up there in Northern California. But like Subcool, rest in peace, one of my favorite breeders, side by side, 2 different grows, 2 different strains, every single time. His germination, like the sub stuff was a lot smaller. Doja's stuff was just faster from seed. And I really like the quality of both end products, but when one of them grows faster from seedling to veg through flower and it produces more and it's just as frosty, like, and you get twice as much of it, it was a pretty easy decision for me.
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe subs seeds were older, but when you finished your sentence with all that, yeah. But you know what? I got to take off, everyone. I'm sorry, I'm going to drop out early, but it's great being here, and I'll catch you all in a bit or whenever on the internets. And yeah, good to see you, everyone. And
Take care,
yeah,
bro.
peace out.
Grower love,
Take it easy,
Tom.
man.
There was
Thanks
lots
again
of
for
good
coming, the
shit.
American One. He let us know beforehand. This wasn't like he just got bored and decided to jump out. So cheers, peace and love to @the_American One with a Keens on Instagram. He's the American One on YouTube. So definitely support him. He's made some really killer crosses. A lot of people find some good shit in his Amy Aces, I should say. And he's got another one called Godiva. And he's done some killer stuff with that Cheesequake cross. Spartan, you were saying that the Cheesequake you had was more grapey. And I'm curious if there was any other flavors that you picked up off of it.
It was kind of gas too, so it's gas at first, and then it finished with the grape. It kind of leaves you with that, and it's one of those ones that, we were in a circle. When you pass the joint, you can taste it almost until the time the joint comes back. I mean, it like lingers in your mouth. I love shit like that. So, because for me anymore, when I'm smoking a joint, I want the flavor because I'm usually not feeling a high from it. So if it tastes good, then at least I can enjoy it that way immediately, from the get-go, right from the first puff.
I'm with you on that, even the dry puff. But sometimes you don't even need to take a dry puff if it's terpy enough. You can taste it in the smoke, which is usually a great indication. Subcool stuff was often that way for me. I actually got really surprised because every year we put aside one of our best nugs of each harvest and jar it and have it on 420, which is now Lady Greenstock and I's wedding anniversary. This year we were on a road trip for our honeymoon and we met up with Sun-Grown 707, and he had grown Subcool strain called Doc Holidays, which is Huckleberry Cookies to Hellfire OG. And the Huckleberry Cookies is like a blueberry cookies. Hellfire OG is more of an OG, which is kind of gassy fuel. So when I grew it, it smelled like gas and pine and like fuel like an OG like the whole time. There was no blueberry scent detectable at all, for me at least. And when I got to Sun-Grown 707's house, after like 5 or 6 months curing, I pull out this jar of Doc Holidays. And I had been talking on podcasts about, my Doc Holidays must have had a super Hellfire OG leaning pheno because there's no blueberry at all, no blueberry at all. I pull out the jar at Sun-Grown's house. He goes to break it up. He's like, dude, you said this thing has no blueberries. Like, smell it. And I fucking smelled it, and it hit me in the face like blueberry candy. Like, it cured up to a more sweet, and that's never happened to me before. I usually get those sweeter smells earlier in the cure. But I remember DJ Short always talks about how blueberry is usually one of those things that gets better as it cures. It's better with age. And that was one of the things he actually liked about it and why he kept it and bred with it for a long time. So that was definitely a surprise for me with that. I always forget the name, fucking Doc Holidays, but it's good stuff.
It sounds like wine.
That's the goal. Frenchie talks about how most cannabis products get worse with age and it's constant degradation. So like say your harvest here is worth, let's say $2,000 per pound. And then over time, it's just going to gradually start dropping off. And by the time it's 2 years old, it's worth next to nothing. With hash, he really liked it because hash can actually go up in value or quality over time because once it's processed and pressed a certain way, like how he makes the temple ball, you get more hashishine, which was not even there before. So some people don't consider that a degradation. Like people that are looking for hash, who want hashishine, can say like there might even be qualities of this aged hash that makes it more desirable and even better with age versus a lot of the products that just get kind of yellowed out and lose their flavor over time.
Yeah, I was wondering if that was like, I don't have the knowledge here, but whatever it is that makes up that flavor of blueberry, I wonder if it's just another terpene that is dominating the flavor at the beginning, like you said, the gas or whatever, flashes off and degrades. And if I don't know if it's a precursor to something else, or if it just flashes off or what it is. But with that removed, then the blueberry comes out. You know what I mean?
No, that makes sense because actually gas is one of the things that I think does go semi-early, and it might be an alcohol or an ester, like the fuel in OG. It's commonly found earlier in the cure, I would say. It can linger around, but I would say like you're probably right on that. one of the things I thought I had a rabbit hole on my page saved of the blueberry, but it's a combination of esters and terpenes. Like linalool is one of them in blueberry, which you wouldn't kind of expect because it's floral. You think of like lavender, but there's limonene as well as part of it, a little bit of a citrusy element, but it is a combination of a lot of minor things in there that make up the blueberry scent.
Yeah, that was the thing. I was thinking that too in my head. Is like, what is it? You know, of the major 20 or 30 terps that they even test for, it could be one of the minor terps. Just be having, you know, just a super tiny amount of it is all it takes to switch it from something totally different to blueberry, or switch it from strawberry to blueberry, you know, or something like that.
Yeah, it's crazy. Actually, it can be like 0.5% of a terpene can make it super distinct, like enough so that it'll be called, like, let's say limonene, for example, everybody knows like citrus. It'll be called like lemon haze when it has 0.5% limonene, but it has such a citrusy note that hits your nose. It's the first thing when you smell it. You're like, oh, this smells citrusy. So they call it lemon haze, even though it's only 0.5% of the volume of the weight of the flower that you're consuming. Like 20+% of it's probably THC and other stuff, but that lemon is what is the signature note.
Yeah, that's why these percentages don't tell us anything.
They tell us
nothing. I mean,
and people will have different sensitivities. When you mention that, it always reminds me of how, like, you know, like with like you buy store-bought like isopropyl alcohol and they have like bitterants in it that, like, so you don't drink it. But like, even so, like the what are called fusel alcohols, like when you're making alcohol, that's German for I think waste or trash or something like this. Basically, they're undesirables that you sometimes get in the fermenting process, especially when like you don't have a lot of control over the heat. And we are very sensitive to some of those alcohols that make the alcohol kind of like hot, or there are other terms that people use for it. It's just not like for a lot of people, it's not really a desirable taste, but yet there's not,
Skunky.
you don't even need, I don't even know if skunky is the right word, but like, anyways, if people are able to be sensitive to it with such a small like amount, you know, it's kind of the same thing here, like what you're saying. Some people are just going to pick up certain things, others won't, or, you know, that particular compound for most humans is just going to be sort of something that we pick up generally.
The fusel thing that you're talking about, Genetic Memory Farms, when he was talking about making beer and fermenting kombucha, he mentioned the fusel alcohols, and they are less desirable, but I think they could be potentially dangerous to us too if we consume them too much, maybe because they're impurities or something. But it's one of those things that we've, like you said, evolved to even have a tiny, tiny little amount of it be super detectable and undesirable. So people tend to avoid them, thankfully. And yeah, it's definitely not what people want to happen with that process, for sure. I lost my train of thought a little bit. Oh, okay. You were talking about different sensitivities of people's nose, and it made me think of how I work with a few different families that have therapy dogs for their kids, and I'll occasionally have to take their dogs for a walk. And even the dogs, and might be obvious to most people, but they have different sensitivities of their nose. Like one dog, it'll walk right along the street and not really get too distracted by anything, and not because of its behavior. I think it's the breed of dog isn't known for having as strong of a nose. Then you walk with one that's like got a golden retriever or a bloodhound or anything that has a stronger scent detector, and it is stopping at every little piss spot where any other dog has been for the last week, and it's like pulling you around and like looking at every little thing. So I think, Matthew, you've mentioned in the past that you don't have a very like strong nose for cannabis, at least in some cases. Like it has to be very potent for you to smell it, where in a lot of people will like give me a sample and I'll detect little things that maybe they're like, oh, I didn't smell that until you said it, and now I can pick it up, or when it's broken up. So maybe I have like a more acute, like there needs to be a smaller amount of certain things for me to detect it. But then with like that blueberry in the last case, maybe I'm less susceptible to detecting certain things. So it really comes down to everybody has a different set of systems in their nose that helps them detect what they smell and taste, interestingly enough.
Yeah, and I see in the chat people talking about hot alcohol, like having like some people are mentioning the sake, which is traditionally given hot. That's just the word that some people use for it. And I haven't made alcohol in a long time, and I haven't drank alcohol in a long time either. But yeah, it's kind of gross. And I think I've talked about it earlier, where the sort of anecdote of a guy who was homebrewing he wanted to homebrew because he homebrewed on a yacht. And basically, because the yacht wasn't temperature controlled, he would get these fusel alcohols. But for nostalgic reasons, and because he didn't know any better, he would drink it. And it was like he liked it or whatever. And then, years later, when he tried to homebrew his house, he found he didn't get the same taste. And eventually, the person who told me the story, he thinks that's what they came about to, was that it was because he was literally fermenting in suboptimal conditions, but that's what he wanted because that's what he grew up and have all these fond memories attached to homebrewing with. So I think that was kind of an interesting parallel, I think, to people who grow cannabis and are looking for certain flavors or certain other profiles, whether they're good, bad, or neutral. Our nostalgia can really direct what we want and what we don't want in some cases. And there's nothing wrong with that, like inherently.
I do recall that story, and it reminds me of a quote, or just a joke, I guess. Some people like the smell of their own farts, and it's like everybody seems to prefer their homegrown more than anything. And it just seems to be the case across the board. Like if you asked 10 home growers, like, do they like their bud or bud from some other grower locally or the dispensary, I'd say like 9 out of 10 of them are gonna be like, I like my bud the most and it's the best. But we have a good question. Thank you to Spartan Grown for sending it in the chat, from Uncle Rick, who asks, I got some alarming info. A good friend picked up a cannabis virus. He had it tested. It came back diagnosed as hop latent viroid. Anyone had experience with it? We talked a little bit about it earlier in the show when we were talking about maybe growing hops alongside. The one thing I'll say is, most notably, like if you Google hop latent viroid cannabis, one of the big things you'll see is like a group out here known as Dark Heart Nursery was giving out clones, and they spread a lot of hop latent viroid, and then they found out a treatment or a cure, whatever you want to call it, to make the plants better. But they've got a really good documentation and YouTube presentations where they'll actually show like the hop latent viroid infected clone versus the clean one side by side, and you can see the one is like way frostier and way healthier, and then the other one you might just think like, oh, that's a shittier plant or it's just not as good of a genetic, but it's the exact same cut infected with hop latent viroid. The treatment is basically tissue culture with a heat treatment and a cold treatment, from my understanding. But some people will say that they have proprietary techniques. So I'm curious what Matthew has to say about that as our resident IPM specialist, and curious if anybody else on the panel has thoughts after that.
Definitely. So hop latent viroid is a plague. It is particularly problematic because, as the name sort of implies, it is latent. So you don't always get the symptoms or the obvious symptoms until like later in its development. So that allows it to passively move through people's grows, especially people who don't know what the symptoms are. And two, since they're not very unique, like stunting, and sometimes you get more severe symptoms as well, like what Jack's talking about sometimes, especially if you're familiar with the plant that you're growing already, and what cannabis, like as a healthy plant, is a really thick budded, dank plant might be, and you're not getting that, and you don't seem to be having any of the sort of issues, sort of for no reason this is happening, and that could be because of hop latent viroid. There are other things though that can stunt a plant that are not even biotic in nature, so that makes it kind of difficult to really know. It does travel mechanically, and there's some research that shows that it can pass vertically through seed. So not only can it move horizontally from one plant to another plant, and especially so if you're like taking cuttings and then you're using that equipment like scissors or whatever, you can spread the viroid this way.
Some people are saying that it could be as little as a branch on one that's infected touching another branch or rubbing.
Yeah, absolutely. That is the case.
That is definitely the case, right? Which is scary.
But depending on where you are, I think the majority of the instances, it's probably better to just cut the fucking thing down and get it the hell out of there.
Absolutely.
Oh, so yeah,
I totally agree.
Medicropper on YouTube has been fighting this for the last year solid. He's got a commercial facility in either Oregon or Washington, and he's really documented, like, the most I know about hop latent viroid is from his firsthand experience with hundreds of plants, like 8 flower rooms. It's like a Mint and Canico, but run a lot worse. No offense to Medicropper, but you guys just have a lot tighter ship and more workers over there that know what they're doing. He's got a lot of like newer guys that he'll go to Europe for like months at a time, and then he'll come back and the grow's all messed up. So it's like grow rescue. And I would see the healthy plants and the unhealthy plants, and you could see literally certain times a branch that would be like starting to flop over on the other one. It would almost be like a little discolored, like a lesser green, almost like a grayish, and it would start to like slump onto the other plant. And then sure enough, if it hit that plant, you could even see like the chain reaction of, oh, this plant had it spread to that plant, and now that plant spread it to that plant. And it can be a nightmare to deal with. He's been, like I said, over the last year, cutting out mothers, trying to find the healthiest ones, and starting with new stock here and there. And it's been a battle, but definitely if anybody's followed Medicropper on YouTube, he is an interesting character. I've learned more about him since watching his battle with this, but just for the sake of this conversation, I think he's got a lot of firsthand documentation of fighting with it and how it spreads throughout a cultivation space. So
yeah, it'll go through really quickly, and that's kind of like the main issue, that like it's not obvious, and so it's kind of a silent killer. And the real thing is that if you can just take in one cutting and transfer it to all of the other plants that you've had for years and years and years, and your mother plants and that sort of a thing. So I expect this to get a lot worse than before it gets better. Not only because there's no conventional treatment available currently, but also because like big nurseries get it, and even with all of their really great biosecurity and tissue culturing and everything, things still get through. This is also true in like horticulture with like impatient spot, or I always get that name mixed up. Impatient secretic spot virus, is that how it goes? Anyways, or like rose rosette disease. I experienced that actually at a rose growing facility, and it came from these Dutch growers, and they like shut down everything, cleaned everything, spent millions of dollars in this like huge international facility. It rolls up 4 months later, and they get rose rosette disease again, which is vectored by a russet mite, actually, not cannabis russet mite, not hemp russet mite, but this special rose russet mite, and it's a real problem. So it definitely happens.
What about in the root zone? Like if you're in a hydroponic cloner, is there a chance that you could infect through the root zone if one was infected?
Oh yeah, like through water.
Infect the whole? Yeah, would it through the water or in a bed? Like if you're growing in a bed or in outside, if you have one that's infected with the plant next to it, would it be able to transmit it through the root zone or no?
I don't think so. I don't know, but I don't think so, because so hop latent viroid it doesn't have that capsid. It doesn't have that protein shell that a lot of viruses have. So and despite that, apparently isopropyl alcohol doesn't actually kill it, just dehydrates it, which is kind of a funky thing. That's why you have to use special things like Vicron, or like, which is a product that you can use, or like bleach, for example, to like actually kill it. So I wouldn't expect it to be able to like weather the storm of like moving through the soil or moving through water at, by any like particularly like long period of time. A lot of viruses, and in this case viroids, aren't really very host or not very what's the word I'm looking for? They're not very stable outside their host.
that is common
Luckily.
for plants and humans. Fortunately, in this case, actually, the one thing I was going to say about the cloners, less so than hop latent viroid, that I'd be worried about would be Pythium. Matthew, would you think Pythium would be something that would be spreading, or are there any other?
Absolutely, that is Fusarium, Pythium, even sometimes Botrytis can be vectored through the root zone. There's Foliar Botrytis. Like people mostly are familiar with it in cannabis as being like a wound or something vectored by like a budworm or something, or it just like infects like the inert floral tissue. But it can infect the foliage of a plant, and it can also go through the roots. Although I will admit those are a lot less common, much less common, and I'm not sure how common it is in cannabis.
I got a question for Matt, and you guys might have already said it, so if I'm repeating it, I apologize. But can meristem tissue culture practices take care of basically a majority of all those things, or is that not true?
Yeah, definitely. Like that's the super advantage of like I say, like meristem or like tissue culturing in that way, because you're essentially trying to take a few cells that have none of the problem. Now viruses, that they infect those that like infect the cells and like use those to reproduce, that's why you need the meristem culture, because it's very difficult, like besides that, to really get a clean, like a host of cells. But with Pythium and like fungal pathogens and bacterial pathogens, those are a lot larger, and the way that they sort of colonize the plant is different enough that I think it's even more easier to do with meristem. But I don't do tissue culturing myself, but that's how I understand it to be.
I'm trying to learn the tissue culture, but I just wanted to reiterate something that Matthew said, because I think it's an important point. He just mentioned how the Dutch rose operation spent millions of dollars shutting down their entire operation, cleaning everything out. Even if, like, let's say they used tissue culture and then got rid of it that way, they got the same issue 4 months later because they looked at the problem from right here, not from like 10,000 feet, so to speak. They were worried about, oh, these plants have this spotted issue, right? They wanted to get rid of that issue, so they just cleaned up the plant. But they didn't realize or think about the fact that we have this pest that's vectoring the issue. So they were short-sighted in their solution. They solved it for 4 months, and then guess what? Now they're right back to square one. So they could shut everything down and try and clean it out again, or they could, implement better IPM to hopefully prevent getting it in the first place. So you could tissue culture that one clone and get a beautiful, healthy mother. But if you go and put it back into that greenhouse where it got the issue from, for example, then you're just going to keep on having the same issue over and over. So you have to kind of look at it from a holistic perspective.
Yeah, somebody was telling me recently, and I'm sure you guys might be able to school me a little bit better. I'm not educated in this, but somebody I know that had powdery mildew, they basically got rid of it, but then still had a mother that was, I don't want to use the term internally has it, but like, is there such thing like that, Matt, where like they can literally hold it, maybe like just say as if we had it in our bloodstream versus on an open skin, in a human, but just in plant retrospect?
So powdery mildew isn't a systemic pathogen, but there are situations where it doesn't systemically colonize the plant. So it stays on the sort of epidermis, right? The sort of like the top layer of the plant, and siphons the sort of the cells that are close to that side. But you can have, like, how do I put this? I don't know if antigen is the right word. It's certainly the right word for like humans and certain diseases of humans, but like you can maybe detect reactions or like things that are associated with a pathogen, in the plant like body that are separate from the organism itself, but it's not like a spore or anything. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So Matthew, with that question, with the powdery mildew, a lot of people notice or believe that maybe it's on the plant, and they're not seeing it until like the stretch is happening or bolting or whatever is going on. Is that just because it's a visual thing, or is it because maybe with like cannabis, for example, when it's going to stretch, you're also changing environmental conditions, like instead of 18 hours or 24 hours of light with no darkness, they can be in 12-12 where there's 12 hours of darkness where maybe there's more moisture in the air that could breed the conditions for that powdery mildew to sporulate or something like that?
That's a good question. So usually it's because, like with powdery mildew specifically, the initial germination of the spore and development is pretty much invisible to us for several days. But when a plant bolts, you're right, physiological processes change, environmental processes change in nature. If it's if it's one of those scotoperiod, photoperiod plants, right, where it's changing with the environment. And also, you're right, humans who are cultivating the plant will also change things because they're trying to initiate a change, right? So all of those factors are in play. But like botrytis, for example, is a systemic pathogen, can exist in the plant with basically no visual symptoms, unaided. And then once the plant's physiology starts to change, or if it senesces, or anything like that, like botrytis is very associated with reproductive tissues in plants generally. It tends to like to infect like inert, and back me up, MJ Coco, I think this is the right way to describe it. I think I learned it this way. like petals and things are like inert tissue, right?
Yeah, unlikely to get infected.
Oh, well, I was told that it was likely to, like, it is infective, like it's infectable at least for botrytis, but like it's like associated with inert tissue because that tissue, it's not really like living in a way, or it's not like vascular, right?
Yeah, there's certain, I'm not sure about what part of the plant. I think different flowers are actually different in that.
That's definitely true too. I guess like I was thinking about it in my before time in the Gerbera daisies and like those large petals,
Right.
you know. But so like with cannabis,
Well, I was thinking about it specifically with sort of the morphology of the cannabis flower. Yeah,
that would
okay.
be different for sure. But
Yeah.
it is, but I do find that it's associated with those structures. But like that's why, and that's one reason why I think cannabis specific research is so like integral, because
Yeah, it's different.
you can't. It's different enough that I wouldn't feel safe saying that's for sure this way.
I think all flower species are so different and individual in that regard. I mean, flower anatomy in plants is so interesting and peculiar. And if a plant is going to have some sort of peculiarity, it's in its reproductive organs.
Right.
So yeah, I think that in order to be really mature as a sort of horticultural agricultural industry focused on a flower, we need to study it in particular. Absolutely.
Completely.
And we are definitely still gleaning too much from sort of associated crops.
Smiley's Garden asked a good question, I believe, and like you were just talking about, Dr. MJ, flower to flower, it can vary from like a type of flower to a different type of flower. And in his question, he's asking even about within cannabis, like from one strain to another, or even it could be like the soil conditions or something else. But I'll just read his question out. He says, "We know that spores are all around, so why are some plants more likely to be infected than others?" Which is
genes
a
are
question.
a big genes would be like the obvious one, right? Like different plants will have different sort of resistance genes. Also, their environment might make them more or less susceptible. So like I talked about the chestnut blight several times before. You get situations where a pathogen will just run roughshod through an entire population, hundreds of miles and thousands of kilometers. And then the only plants that survive are those in refugia, where they were just separate enough and they were sheltered enough that they just didn't happen to get it. This is in a natural setting, but I think it sort of speaks to the realities of even in cultivation and why people shelter their plants for this exact reason. So there's a ton of reasons why people would want to look for different plants, and why just because there are spores everywhere, it doesn't guarantee one way or another that you're going to get infected.
Mr. Bacillus says you can remove fruiting bodies and mycelium on leaf surface, but Haustotrium can remain. Haustotrium can remain.
It's a Haustoria, a singular Haustorium and multiple Haustoria. Haustoria are I guess you could call them like the roots of a powdery mildew organism. So like they sink into they siphon out the resources from the plant cell cytoplasm.
So one thing I wanted to mention was Scatola La Granola, who is a semi-controversial figure, depending on who you ask in the community. He mentioned a while back about powdery mildew that in evaluating soil samples throughout a greenhouse, when there was plants like side by side, sometimes there'd be a plant that had no powdery mildew in a case where another plant with PM had fallen over on top of it and it had not gotten infected at all. And what they did was they checked out the soil samples from the pots where the ones were infected versus not infected. And I don't know if it was like proprietary or if I'm just not remembering what it was, but the ones that were like basically healthier, they could predict, or he could predict which ones would have PM or not have PM, just looking at the soil samples. And I mean, I guess in retrospect, he would have seen the plants because he was out there sampling. I don't know exactly how the whole thing worked out, but their claim was that by just a soil analysis, they could say that these are the ones that they believed or thought most likely to have PM or whatever the infection was in the greenhouse.
Yeah, I don't know about all of that personally. I feel like maybe I would agree with that if it's that like the soil is maybe it's got some microbes in it that are going to confer some resistance qualities and traits. That would be a really great thing.
That's my
Maybe
thought. Like Spartan said, I think 70 to 80% was reduced based on having a certain type of trichoderma in the soil, if I'm remembering correctly, Spartan.
Trichoderma, yep.
And it was the Haas or whatever, the trichoderma with the H.
Hazarinum or whatever it is. But the other thing is that, like, you know, a plant could get all the right nutrients that it needs, and this is where I think that I sometimes this statement is sometimes contentious for some people. But if you have a plant, somebody earlier in the chat also asked, like, if you have what are resistance genes and how do you isolate them? Well, like, it's also not even enough to say resistance gene, because those genes are always they're interacting with other genes in the plant. They're interacting with the particular virulence traits and abilities of the genes of the pathogen. So there's that sort of battle happening. There's the environment, which is the stage in which these two actors are fighting, right? So like I said in the Future Cannabis Project podcast from a couple of days ago, or even just today or yesterday, it's dynamic. It's a dynamic process, and so it's like, for example, with the tropical wilt, not virus, but with the Pythium, is it? There's a tropical wilt problem for banana, and I'm forgetting the pathogen specifically, but when they do resistance breeding, when they're trying to breed in resistance genes and resistance traits into these bananas, you might get a resistance to one pathogen, but then confer a susceptibility to another one, or a susceptibility to certain environmental stressors or things like that. So it's definitely like tumultuous, to say the least, very complex.
It's ever evolving.
Genomicist. Yeah, exactly.
No doubt.
Then there's
'Cause there's
epigenetics too,
epigenetics
right?
and the breeding that's happening in combination, so it makes it especially complicated. But I wanted to give Smiley's Garden, a dedicated listener, a chance to chime in. They say Scott says that there is a direct correlation to the level of Omycetes in the soil and the likelihood of PM. If levels are kept below a threshold, the risk of PM should be gone, is the claim.
Mycetes. And those are called water molds, and a lot of them are pathogenic, but that's not to paint the entire group incorrectly or wrongly with one brush. I would, though, ask, like, how this is the case, because, like, what's going on there? There are a lot of different kinds of oomycetes. So I feel like whenever people tell me, like, oh, if you have enough bacteria, or if you have enough fungi, or if you have a balance, like, you know, not to be like pedantic, but like, which bacteria, which fungi, which oomycetes?
I shouldn't quote him as much, because I actually don't believe in too much of what Scott's doing. I think he has some interesting points from time to time, but I don't know if I 100% buy into his thing. And Coot, who I respect a bunch, really hates Scott and shit talks a lot of what he has to say. But my thought here is, and I've said this on another show about something unrelated, but correlation does not equal causation. Like, we see ice cream sales go up every summer, and we also see murder go up every summer. So somebody could say eating ice cream causes one to murder more often. That would be correlation equaling causation. It's not true. We just know that murder happens more in the summer, usually because when people are hot, they're more pissed off, and it's more accessible in certain parts of the world where, like, there's snow and stuff where you leave footprints and it's harder to travel. There's less murder in the wintertime because it's harder to actually do it. So there's, like, the correlation causation thing isn't a good argument. And I think Scott comes out of the, I believe, the Ingham camp, and they make good compost over there. By all accounts, I haven't tried any, but he has kind of branched off into his own thing, and he's doing his own consulting. So I think, being so new in the field, or newer in the field, he might have some theories and ideas and hypotheses that he's putting out there. And I'm not sure how much science and data there is to back all of them. That's why I wanted to run it past you.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, honestly, I think it's totally fine to share that information, and I think it's great to have the conversation. And I don't mean what I was saying earlier in, like, a, you know, particularly snarky way. I am genuinely curious. because I do think microbiome effects can be beneficial, but I do feel as though people just say that and then they don't like go further. And I guess I'm one of those people who can like actually sort of tell a little bit more than that surface level stuff. So I'd be curious to know which ones and why.
Well, I
Because
also like
usually,
that his were at least real world is one thing that I do like, because something else I see that I think is a common misapplication in the cannabis space is people will take a lab study where there's
right.
like a petri dish, something like this eats that in a petri dish, and maybe it would work in the real world, and you could try it and you might find the next big thing for IPM or something else. But sometimes the lab, because it's so sterile and so just different than most people's grow environment, doesn't translate or correlate to what is happening in the environment. So that's why I always like that you've advocated in the past that people actually try putting these things into practice. Like with the one of the predator mites and the banker plants, you and Brandon actually made that project happen. You did it in real life to see, it's like, okay, this is a theory or philosophy. Let's put it into practice and see how well it works. And like, how long do they stick around for? Like, is this actually worth implementing from a cost and effect standpoint?
Yeah, Smiley in the chat saying that Scott is actually looking with a microscope and quantifying the soil biology, and Coot is only guessing about what could be happening. Big difference. And I guess so, but like, so then it sounds like you would know then what exactly the oomycetes he's talking about are, and that sort of a thing. But like, I just feel like people never actually follow up with the specifics. They'll just say fungi or bacteria, and people will just roll over for that. And I don't personally, because I know that the world is very dynamic and ever changing. And a lot of science, as much as I love my empirical studies and everything, quote unquote, I'm very well aware that a lot of stuff can't be totally reproduced. And certainly, like you say, laboratory studies are not field studies, and field studies, you don't just have one field study and that like discounts every single thing unless it's such a bold claim as like this never happens. Well, then you only need one study to confirm that can happen.
Called anecdotal science right there. But
Right.
the interesting thing is like Ted Hussey was one of the guys pushing like the conversation Coot was kind of digging into Scott about was talking about compost teas and like if they're effective or not, or if they're needed. And what it reminded me of is conversations we've had on this very show in the past of, you might be able to look at a microscope, but because we've figured this out in that field, not me personally, much smarter people than myself in the microbiology and other related fields know that just microscope work is not fine enough detail to identify exactly which organisms. It might put you in the ballpark, but until you genetically test them, that's why they go to genetic testing at this point. They're not using visual identification anymore.
Yeah,
They're using
microbiologists don't do that. I mean, they do for certain things, absolutely. Especially like, my mind goes to like when you're looking at blood samples, for example, certain things like are very obvious. But yeah, like not only are there various isolates that are morphologically basically identical, but genetically don't have to be. So that's one example right there. Another one is that you get bacteria, for example, or even fungi. You've got anamorph, telomorph forms, sexual, asexual forms. In bacteria, you even got some bacteria that have, they have cryptic forms, or they can change their form very, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess very often, to put it simply. So like, yeah, like visual symptoms aren't the be all end all in all cases.
Well, and like people put a high value on that. They're like, oh, this person has taken so-and-so's course and they know how to do microscope work. And I'm like, that's sort of like training somebody how to like drive a Flintstones car when they're going to learn how to drive. It's like, that's the technology of the past. You got to train them on what is the current thing. So like PCR, to my understanding, is what most biologists are using to identify the genetic. They're actually taking the entire system and they could say, this is the genetic code of this particular microorganism, and they can identify exactly what it is, versus a visual, you're just sort of guessing. So it's like, I thought it'd be cool to learn it because I loved compost teas. Like maybe I can microscope my own compost tea and maybe that'll be beneficial. But then when I actually talk to the people that have more knowledge in those fields, it seems like it almost is a misguided task, because you might not be getting the identification that you believe you're getting. So I think it's almost more, it can almost be more of a detriment, because if you have been taught or told, hey, look at this one and that one, And if you see these things, you're all good. But if you see these, they're bad, blah, blah, blah. Well, if you think that you're good and then it turns out, well, if you actually did more genetic work on it, they're actually maybe let's say the most harmful, something that'll kill your plant straight up. But because you were told in a class based on some anecdotal, antiquated style, you believe that this is going to be healthy for your plants. So I just think that it really comes down to trying to do the best with what we have with our modern science. And oftentimes it doesn't come from the cannabis space. Like, I hate to say that because I love the cannabis community. I love shows like this. We disseminate a lot of good information, I believe. But sometimes there is misinformation or sometimes older information that can be misguided. And I think it's nice to hear and see what is available in the current state of science.
I mean, I don't even think we need to get too in the reeds here. Like, here we go. Here's an organism that the genome, like every insect, or not every insect, but most insects go through some sort of metamorphosis, and they have the same genome, and yet a caterpillar has the same genome as a butterfly. Kevin McKernan of Medicinal Genomics made this point in a presentation. I always bring that up because I thought it was just a really overt way to make a really complex point super simply, which is that, like, sometimes your eyes aren't telling you the truth. Like, how long did it take for people, some people ask me if a caterpillar, if it is its own thing, or they don't know that caterpillars turn into butterflies. And for me, that's very banal information, but it's not, like, not everyone knows these sorts of things. And I'm not trying to sound like I am superior or anything of that sort for knowing that. I love bugs.
But it's certainly not intuitive information. You wouldn't look walking through nature and be like, oh, there's a caterpillar. That's going to turn into something that fucking flies. If you told somebody that, they'd think that you're like on an acid trip.
Right,
until you observe it long enough to see it go into that cocoon and crack out and become a butterfly.
I don't blame people for not, at all. Not at all. So Smiley, if you do have that information, I would love to look into it, because I don't, I want to give people the opportunity to explain their points and their reasoning there. At least me personally, I don't want to speak for everyone on the panel. But yeah, if you have some of that data, or if you know what people are talking about with those oomycetes or with the fungi, bacteria, because the microbiome, even in my cannabis global IPM review videos on my channel, like, I go over the cannabis microbiome, and like 808 Rooting Prospects mentions earlier in the chat. I do think that sometimes there are things that we attribute to genetics that could actually possibly be the genetics of a different thing, not the endogenous genes of the plant, but those of the microbes inside or outside on the surface, or just existing nearby in the soil or on the foliage. That certainly could be the case, just like with aphids. Aphids have endogenous genes in them that allow them to, like, break down sugars and other sorts of aspects, like pectinase, and that breaks down pectin and all those sorts of things. But they also have microbes in their body that break down other things, that shut off immune responses and pathways and that kind of a thing too. And they don't have that. The aphids don't have that. It's the microbes inside them that allow them to do that.
I wanted to say one thing about the whole Scott situation, because I don't want to just be completely trashing a guy who's not even here to defend himself. I've listened to a lot of his talks, and I do think that I believe he's having success with the farmers and growers that he's consulting with. So I'm happy for him, as I'm happy for Coot, who's having success with his grows and the people that he's worked with on the forums for years and years, helping them successfully grow cannabis. I think this is one of those perfect situations of, like, there's no one way to do it. Multiple people are having success with multiple methods. I think it's fun to discuss them, and I actually like that Scott's trying to dive into the data. It's fun to be able to grow really simply with just water only, doing something like Coot, where you're not having to worry about pHing and monitoring a bunch of soil tests and things like that. But I also like what Brandon's doing with sap analysis, soil analysis, and Scott's more on that side of the spectrum, where he's testing the soils and saps and trying to dial things in as much as possible. And I think that there's validity to both sides, and I'm happy that there are people pushing the boundaries on organics to kind of get those levels close to, if not equal to, hydroponic growing, where they've got the systems completely dialed in, where they know what nutrients are needed when and how to deliver them at the most appropriate ratios and things like that.
Ostensibly, both of these people are having, I don't mean to interrupt, I've been bogarting the conversation, so I just want to say this last part. Ostensibly, these people are having success, right? So, like, there's got to be something a little bit to it, right? Maybe not everything. And I agree with you. I'd love to have a conversation. I don't want to speak ill of anyone in that case, but those particular arguments I do find a little bit weaker. But like, even with myself, sometimes I'll say stuff and I assume people like, like right here on the podcast, I don't like put a citation in the chat box every time I like reference a research report or anything like that, right? So I get it, for brevity's sake, for the sake of conversation. You can't always dive into the details, and don't expect everyone to, because that would make you really fun at parties, right? But I definitely appreciate that people are at least the intent is that they're trying to do that, and I can't argue with that.
For sure. Noah,
Yeah,
did you have something you want to say there?
Yeah, you kind of gotta. I would just say you kind of got to get in there in the ring and just start doing it yourself. When I first came here, I've been growing for, I don't even know, 6, 7, 8 years. And I thought that I was king dude. And I mean, I was getting good results, and being around all you ninjas, I was humbled very quickly. And I was lucky enough to be able to be humble enough to learn. And I've gotten way, way better results. And I have just fine-tuned this over the years. And like I was just saying to you before we started over, I just completely am starting over. I'm doing something completely different, and I'm scared. And it's kind of like a good scared, because it's like I know what I'm looking for, and I know that different things that I didn't know before, and I'm just trying something completely new. I'm doing different soil. I'm doing water only, and it's really weird. I feel kind of out in a limb for the first time in a while, and it's kind of exciting, and I know I'm going to run into some problems, and but I think that anybody that's going to grow, you just gotta just jump in and do it. When I first started growing, the guy that showed me what to do, I was smart enough to listen to him, and I got really good advice, and I hit the ground running. Most people did not believe that was my weed that I grew. They were like, "No way, you bought this or something." I'm like, "No, that was my first grow ever," and it was really good, because somebody that knew what they were doing told me what to do, told me exactly what to get. Make sure you do organic this. Make sure you do that. Don't listen to any, people that are telling you to do all these salt stuff. Don't do all these powders. Don't do BC Bloom. Don't do all this stuff. And I didn't, and it turned out well. Now, did I get as good a yields as other guys? No. Did I have any idea what IPM at the time was? No. And then the same guy that showed me how to grow, he told me, "Hey, I've never sprayed with anything. I've never had any problems." And I was like, "Wow, that's insane." Go over to his house like 6 months ago. He's dealing with thrips. He's having a big issue with it. And I told him, I was like, "Bro, you got to be preventive doing this stuff." So it's like, you got to be willing to take advice, and you got to be willing to learn new stuff if you're going to be growing this. This is a constantly evolving machine. And like I said, I opened a door, and now I feel kind of giddy, like a little kid, but scared at the same time. So
I think that's the best reaction to have. Honestly, that's a very endearing story to hear. Let's not be intellectually dishonest here. Millennia ago, people were growing plants, agriculture, and they didn't know what a microbiome was. Maybe they had sort of holistic or animistic beliefs about the world that in some ways are actually kind of relevant, I would say, from this like sort of hollow genome perspective that I like to look at things from, that things are all connected, right? But and they were able to grow these plants, and maybe not like in the same way that we do, of course. I don't want to make a false equivalency, but like, you don't have to know some of these cool things to actually grow well. But that's for certain definitions of well, I guess.
The more you know, it definitely helps.
Yeah, I'm with you there to a large extent, Matthew. One of the things to always remember about the traditional plant techniques and farming techniques is they're selected over those aforementioned millennia. So
right,
they work even if the practitioners aren't aware of the mechanism.
Yes, I love that way that you put it.
Yeah.
I want to give Spartan Grown an opportunity to give us any of his final thoughts that he might have for this week's show. He's been nice and quiet over there, but I want to make sure he has a chance to get any final thoughts in before he has to reload his tray, let the dogs out, and get ready for Michigan Bros Grow Show in 15.
Well, thanks, Jack. Thanks for the show as always. Thanks everybody on the panel. It's always fun hanging with you guys. I don't have a lot to add, man. I'm just I've been Actually, I had a great day. I spent most of my day outside planting plants. I spent like $50 in plants today. It wasn't all vegetables. I had a lot of herbs too. So I'm just building my garden. So it was a fun day outside. It wasn't even with cannabis. Surprise is surprise, but it's still, I love growing things. So
It's funny. I did the exact same thing today.
see, you can't. Growing is what's fucking addictive, man. That's the gateway to growing everything, man.
I can't wait to come visit you guys and see your cannabis gardens and the non-cannabis gardens, because I'm actually a Spartan. I watched one of your update videos, and I'm actually pretty impressed with just what survived from last year and sprouted back up and started growing itself right in its place, especially in Michigan, where I know your winters are brutal.
Yeah, I just put a big old thick mat of fucking leaves down, and those are free. They drop on their own. I just mowed them.
I seen that too. That was really cool, Spartan. I totally dig that, man. Yeah. I like you said, you get the bug, man. Like, dude, I talked to Coot on Aaron the Grower. I think a live stream with a bunch of guys. I can't remember when it was, Christmas or New Year's. He told me a store over in Portland. I went over there, talked to him, ended up buying like $300 worth of stuff, took it home just for my vegetable garden.
Yeah,
got some raised beds, and I'm geeking out on all that stuff too. I just want to bore you guys with my vegetable garden stuff, but I'm doing all that stuff too.
Dude, I can sit here and talk for hours. Dude, this year I have 3 raised beds right now. I added this hose that is like in between a soaker hose and a sprinkler. It's got like, it's regular vinyl hose, but it's got like slits cut in it. So little fucking water streams. So if you lay it with they have a white line on it. If you lay it with a white line up, it'll be like a sprinkler. If you lay it with a white line down, it's like a soaker hose. So I just fed that through my 3 beds and put stakes down to hold it down, and I was twisting it so it would shoot the way I wanted it to towards each plant and stuff. And I was fucking stoked over a stupid hose, man.
That is awesome.
Yeah, I can do all 3 beds. All I gotta do is with one hose. So I just turn the water on, and I can do all 3 of my beds.
It's those
I
little
just got a bunch of crazy hoses, and I'll post a picture of my hoses in our group chat. I got some crazy hoses too, I swear to God.
We're growers talking about hoses over here.
All right, man. I gotta get the hell out of here.
Cheers, Spartan.
See you guys. Thanks for having me.
Great, love Spartan.
No, I was gonna say the one thing is that $300 in the time that you go through it, I bet you're gonna grow way more than $300 worth of food, and it'll be a lot better quality and better for the environment because it's not being shipped. It's all done right in your backyard, which is super empowering. Awesome to see that you're doing that. The other thing I was gonna say is also awesome to see that you're stepping into growing cannabis in soil, water only a little bit. I know that you've been in soil with your own little recipes, but it's cool to see you doing something completely different, because I believe the more you can kind of step out of your comfort zone and make yourself a little bit uncomfortable, it's your opportunity to grow, not just like the plants, but as a person. I think when you force yourself through those uncomfortable stages, you really have an opportunity to learn. And I think you're going to learn a lot throughout this next few grows and that Bio 365 soil. I've seen a lot of people have great results, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it turns out for you. And I wish you nothing but success in there.
I appreciate that. Yeah. And then I didn't want to interrupt everyone they're talking. This ankle surgery, man, it really set me back. I have a tent. I was talking to you about getting a light, and I got a bunch of really good seeds from a lot of people, some really good stuff from Predicated Breeding Kyle there, some raw candy stuff. I'm really excited to pop some stuff from Brandon. I got a bunch of autos from Full Duplex, my buddy Dan Jimmy, that I'm going to be growing outside. And I'm really excited. And I got some blackstrap he gave me. I bought some from him. He gave me a really good deal. Got some from my buddies. And I am really excited about doing a bunch of seed stuff too. So I just, am just glad to be able to be moving around a little bit more. This surgery was pretty brutal. But yeah, I'm really excited about some of the seed stuff I got going on too.
This is not nearly the extent of what your situation is, but I did find out recently, after twisting my knee a bit, that I have a very mild case of tendonitis. So I've been nursing that too. And, it's just such a weird sensation. It's not even painful, but it's like present. It's like I can feel in my knee presence almost in a way, and it's a little bit less dexterous than it is usually. So I'm empathizing with you, man.
Have you tried like any topical CBD rubs? Like that's the one when I'm having like issues with muscle pain, tendonitis, and issues like that in joints. Topical CBD or even mixture of THC and CBD salves do a really great job, and as short as like an hour to and just a couple of days, they can really provide tons of relief.
This is this is from an injury about 6 months ago. So maybe I took too long to really get it checked out. But yeah, I'm surprised I didn't figure that out. So I appreciate you saying that. We'll see what that can do for me.
Yeah, knees and ankles are like the worst to try and recover from because it's almost like never the same.
No.
Well, I didn't want to hear that part.
Well, you use it all the time, so you just notice. And I think
Right.
it can be the same if you do good physical therapy and you go through like the rehab process yourself. I don't necessarily like advocate going and spending a ton of money unless you can afford it or have good insurance.
I do have
get the
some
physical
I
therapy.
have that's how I found out because I went to a physical therapist recently, and I think it is probably the mildest version of tendonitis anyone's ever done seen. Which is, I guess, me trying to make myself feel better. But you're right, knees are so complex, elbows, ankles, those joints. At least I have range of motion. It's just not the same.
Yeah, because I hurt my knee way back in like playing Pop Warner football. I'm 32 now, so I was like what, maybe 8 or 10, and like my same knee is still effed up just from then. So it's weird.
Yeah, football
Well, I do
injuries.
appreciate the data point, regardless.
My dad, when we were doing a photo shoot years ago, the photographer is like, "Did you used to play football?" And he's like, "Yeah, how do you know?" He's like, "When you're moaning and groaning, getting into certain like kneeling positions or whatever, standing, you could
Right.
basically hear because all these old injuries sort of come back to haunt you a little bit." But oral intake of CBD as well, not just the topical salves. I've also had that. I have back problems. I got in a car accident, like Noah. I got rear-ended. I had a fractured C5 vertebrae, and loss of height fracture is what they call it, and it was a literal pain in the neck, like my fucking neck. I had some whiplash, so I used to just use predominantly high THC varieties for my day-to-day functioning, but I found that CBD on those worst days when you're having lots and lots of pain, both orally as like a tincture or topically as a salve. I don't personally enjoy smoking it because it takes away from the effects I'm looking for from the THC often, and I don't necessarily get the same pain relief benefit that I do from the tincture or the salve. So I just wanted to throw that out there for you two and anybody else who is listening with that similar kind of pain.
Yeah, I just want to follow that up with, like what I'm learning in physical therapy, and like I already kind of knew this, but you should, lift a couple of weights. I'm a bit of a Poindexter, I'll admit it, but do a little bit of stretches, do some strength training for especially as you age.
Stretching will do so much. I'm a big advocate for yoga, but like I'll say this: whenever I've been in pain, I could like get a lacrosse ball and try and like roll it out or some other thing, like smash it. But
Use
doing
your
all of that,
muscles.
it's more painful. Where if I just do a stretch and like stretch that area, oftentimes it'll relieve it by bringing either more blood flow to the area or actually loosening up the stiff muscle that you were having issues with.
Yeah, the military sort of changed my perspective on calisthenics and training, and they're always like 30 years behind on the current medical science, and they'll make you, oh, you feeling shin splints? Well, you should just keep going. You should just keep going. Just walk that out. That's not how you should. That is not. Yeah, exactly. It's not really how you should deal with shin splints. But that's why the VA exists, right? Anyways, not that they really give people a lot of those
Benefits.
benefits. Yeah, that's the word I was looking
it's
for.
unfortunate though. Yeah, like that was the old, even in like sports. Like I grew up in the Midwest, it was sort of like rub some dirt in it, like no blood, no foul, like fucking tough it out. You're a man, no crying in whatever sport. So you tough it through these injuries and then end up having long-term repercussions oftentimes. And shin splints is definitely not one that you want to just go through because it get worse and worse progressively. So
I'll never forget my friend who got flat-footed just from ruck marches. Yeah,
it's common. People get PTSD from basic training.
Yeah,
like I support the U.S. military because they give us the freedoms. I don't necessarily support all the wars that we've gotten involved in or skirmishes and things like that, but I do support the individuals that sacrifice their freedom for ours. But it's unfortunate that so many of them, 22 a day, I mentioned this on another show, unfortunately too many, take their own lives here, which is actually more than die overseas in active combat, which is something that I think should definitely be discussed more often so people can reach out to the veterans in their life and make sure that they're doing okay and getting the assistance that they need, because often they're not. And everybody can use a little help.
We're getting up to that time, aren't we?
We are. We got the last 5 minutes. So I guess first I'll pass it over to Noah the Grower.
Hey, yeah. Sorry I was gone for a couple weeks there, guys, but I'm glad to be back. And one quick thing, I have learned so much from all of you guys. And whenever I'm listening to you guys telling everybody else stuff, sometimes it feels like you guys are talking directly to me. And I have fixed so many of my issues. Dr. Coco, all you guys, Spartan, everyone. And I've learned so much. And anybody listening, I would just say, hey, man, if somebody tells you something, just try it. You know, you might learn something. And you can always learn anything, no matter how good you think you are at something. And it's been very humbling being here with all you guys, and I have a great time. I'm Noah the Grower from Instagram. If you got any questions, you can come check my stuff out.
Always happy to have you, Noah. Appreciate your perspective always, and pleasure to have you. And I think that you're right about people should be open to that feedback, whether they implement it or not. I think it's good to have an open mind and not get offended if somebody offers somebody feedback or says something on a show that maybe they're making a mistake and we're highlighting how to fix that mistake. It's okay to fix it. It's okay to get better. We're all constantly on that upward trajectory. Hopefully we want to, that's the goal of this, you know, we're all getting better together. So cheers to you, Noah. Thank you so much for coming. Next up, we got Kyle of Predicated Breeding.
Thanks, Jack. Kind of random off topic. So speaking of military, my sister and her husband, who's active military, they just got sent to Germany for 5 years. But I'm trying to see what they have out there for cannabis. I'm trying to see if maybe I can get some seeds out here. Obviously, in a scenario where he wouldn't get in trouble, but it'd be pretty interesting to see what's going on over in that side of the country.
I would be careful. I'd also be careful for OPSEC.
Right.
And,
I mean,
maybe.
Yeah, I don't think yeah. I mean, it's for sure. It's just a thought process in my head, but I obviously wouldn't want anything to do with
Contact me.
Yeah, I will.
Okay.
Germany is really interesting for a lot of reasons, but yeah.
Well, I thought it was like mostly, and again, this is just me being naive, obviously, and not doing research, but I thought it was mostly like kind of like somewhat rundown city. But where my sister's house is, it's like beautiful, beautiful farmland. It's just like as far as the eye can see, and she was taking pictures of their yard, and they have all this
where
property.
she is in Germany?
I would butcher the name. I could send it to you though. I forget what it is.
It's on base, right? Or as close to.
No, it's like military housing, but there's also civilians that are kind of in those housing too. So it's not like just straight up military base. It's like, I don't know how to explain it.
It's an interesting setup, but definitely maybe off-air conversation for some, like you said,
perhaps
security reasons.
Anywho, OPSEC, observe it. Also true for other things in your life, cybersecurity, Equifax,
That was quite the mess up there. But with that said, Matthew Gates, you want to give your final thoughts and shout out?
Yeah, no, I want to thank everyone in chat for asking the cool questions. I've had many conversations with, for example, Smiley's Garden, and recently I had a long conversation with Chad Westport, who I also see in the comments, and I appreciate both of their activity and sort of stimulating these conversations. And I thought it was a really endearing one that we had, like the last 15, 20 minutes here talking about the intricacies of the microbiome and other sorts of things. So I just want to say that I really do appreciate, and I keep feeling like I'm just repeating myself, but those conversations are pretty fun and they're cool. And we get to, it's a crucible, these podcasts can be a bit of a crucible and burning down things to their essentials, so that people can disseminate that info. Speaking of which, if you want to learn more info about IPM and other sorts of things like that, you can check me out in 2 major places, now 3. One is my YouTube channel, which I haven't uploaded to in a little while, which you're not supposed to say when you're advertising, but there's a ton of cool stuff there anyways. You can also find me on my Discord, which you can get access to through my Patreon, which is patreon.com/Zenthanol, same name as the YouTube channel. And you can also find me on Instagram at SyncAngel, where I think most people actually know me from, with the sobriquet SyncAngel. Yeah.
How long have you been doing the YouTube for? I'm just curious.
I believe I started my YouTube in 2014.
So that's quite a bit of time, because that's something I don't think a lot of people realize is you have a tremendous back catalog of information where if you didn't put out another video for the rest of your life, I think you've already put a pretty concrete IPM reference guide out there for the community. So for those who haven't yet, definitely check out Zenthanol on YouTube, because it's like my personal IPM reference guide that I've helped many growers with. And I think that there's few other places like it that are so open and helpful and some often concise. Like the Cannabis IPM video is like 2 hours, part 2 or whatever, but most of the videos for like pest primers which
Yes.
are extremely effective. Very short and sweet to the point. They give you all the information that you would want and need and help you apply it in your grow. So with that said, definitely big shout out to him, and maybe consider supporting on the Patreon over there, starting at just $1 per month. That'd be pretty cool. And last but certainly not least, Dr. MJ Coco.
Hey guys, yeah, I am Dr. MJ Coco from CocoForCannabis.com. Thanks for the shout outs and everything else. And I wanted to say I love that Zenthanol's library of YouTube videos as well. I think it should get much more love. And yeah, we're trying to publish the sort of articles to go along with that and be hosting all of that. So I was a huge fan of that stuff.
I do appreciate it. I'm still dealing with a data recovery issue though, so
No
unfortunately.
But anyways, guys, I also wanted to tell everybody about the strain review giveaway that we're doing this month. Let's see, Dirtro, a dude, just mentioned the Metagrow light, and that reminded me of this, that we're giving one of those away, Metagrow Fold 8 this month. All you gotta do is write a strain review and get entered to win that. It can cover 5x5. You can also dim it down and cover 4x4. Check out my YouTube video on that and go write a strain review. Yeah, and come visit us at CocoForCannabis.com. I was pretty quiet today. I was kind of like drifting off, smoking a bowl, enjoying the conversations. But I'll chime in more maybe next week. So grow love, everyone.
Grow love, Dr. MJ. We look forward to having you back next week. Dr. MJ also has an amazing selection of videos on his YouTube you can check out. And also CocoForCannabis.com is an amazing place full of lots of helpful guides and tutorials on how to grow cannabis affordably. A lot of great stuff for cocoa, but it generalizes outside of that as well to lighting and IPM and more IPM.
Oh no.
We lose Jack.
Think so.
Uh-oh.
Coming.
Only for
One
a
of the cool
moment.
things that I think
It's
about that
only
type of
him
collaboration
left
is,
to say his outro too.
Oh, he's
yeah, it says my
out.
connection's unstable. I guess I'll be back soon.
Oh, there you are. You're back.
Okay, good. I was just going to say, yeah, Zenthanol's YouTube, I don't think gets rewarded by the YouTube algorithm because they like constant new content all the time. So like, because he has a back catalog, he's not going to make the pest primer 7 times over and have it come out every few weeks or months. I think that it's great that you're collaborating with Coco for Cannabis, because when I made YouTube videos about like paintball or other stuff when I was in the earlier days, I found some of my traffic would come from like forums and forum posts. So like Coco for Cannabis, a lot of the traffic might come from there on those older videos that might not be being pushed by the YouTube algorithm.
Yeah.
But when it gets put into a community, it gets a lot more eyeballs on it, because it can even be hard to find sometimes within the mix of so many other great videos, what somebody's looking for. Like maybe they have spider mites and they just go and start scrolling through the videos as opposed to typing Zenthanol spider mites. So
yeah,
it's
We'll try
definitely
to
great.
give good visibility and some link juice back to his channel.
It's good stuff for sure, and I'm happy to see it for a lot of reasons. And with that said, we've gone a few minutes over, but I'm at Jack Greenstock on Cannabis as well as Instagram. You can find me Jack_Greenstock on Twitter, and if you want to email me, jackgreenstock47@gmail.com. It's been a pleasure as always, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Everyone in the chat, the people on the panel, really appreciate all of you.